I've always admired the way Melissa gets ready for work each morning. She's meticulous, almost ritualistic, in her routine. Foundation, mascara, blush, lipstick, every detail perfect. Her clothes are always impeccably chosen, each outfit radiating professionalism and subtle allure. I'd never doubted her fidelity. We'd been married for 5 years, and although the passion had dulled, I believed our commitment was solid. Until last Tuesday, that morning, as she kissed me goodbye, I caught an unfamiliar scent lingering on her clothes, a cologne I didn't recognize. It wasn't the soft floral perfume she usually wore. This was musky, masculine, invasive. It gnawed at me all day, an unwelcome intruder in my thoughts. After a sleepless night, I decided to investigate. She'd left her phone on the nightstand as she showered, steam curling out from beneath the bathroom door. With a heart pounding in my chest, I picked it up. Melissa's lock screen code was no secret. She trusted me enough not to hide it. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before typing it in. I opened her messages, scrolling through the usual chatter with friends and colleagues, until I found a thread with a name I didn't recognize. Derek. My gut twisted as I read through their conversations. It started innocuously enough, but soon became more personal, more intimate. My eyes locked on a message from him. Can't wait to see you tonight. Our secret place. Same time. I heard the shower turn off. Panic surged through me, and I quickly put the phone back, sliding under the covers and pretending to be asleep. Melissa emerged from the bathroom, a towel wrapped around her, hair damp and glistening. She hummed softly, a tune I used to find endearing. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said, leaning down to kiss me. Her wet hair brushed my face, and I forced a smile, suppressing the bile rising in my throat. "Morning," I murmured, my mind racing. All day I couldn't concentrate. At work, emails went unanswered, tasks half done. My thoughts kept drifting back to Derek, to the messages, to their secret place. Who was this man? What was he to Melissa? And why hadn't I seen this coming? By the time I got home, I had formulated a plan. I would follow her, find out where they met, and confront them. The more I thought about it, the more a dark idea began to take shape. Revenge. I had to make them pay for betraying me. Melissa greeted me as usual, a warm smile that now seemed laced with deceit. "How was your day?" she asked, her eyes innocent, or so I thought. "Same old," I replied, forcing nonchalance. "Got any plans tonight?" She paused, a momentary flicker of something in her eyes. "Guilt? Fear? Just a work thing," she said, too quickly. "Meeting a client for dinner." "Okay," I said, keeping my tone light. "Don't work too hard." She laughed, a sound that once brought me joy but now felt hollow. "I'll try not to." Later, as she got ready, I watched her through the slightly ajar bedroom door. She chose a dress that was too nice for a simple work dinner, applied her makeup with more care than usual. I knew she was going to meet him, and it made my blood boil. She left the house around 7 p.m., and I waited a few minutes before grabbing my keys and following her. The adrenaline coursing through me made my hands shake as I drove, keeping a safe distance from her car. She drove across town, pulling into the parking lot of a small, dimly lit restaurant. I parked a few spots away and watched as she got out, looking around before walking inside. I waited, counting the minutes, my mind racing with dark thoughts. Finally, I saw her through the window, sitting at a table with a man who must be Derek. He was handsome in a rugged way, his hand brushing hers across the table. They laughed, and it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I took a deep breath and got out of the car, walking towards the restaurant with purpose. As I entered, I caught sight of them in a corner booth, their heads close together. The hostess greeted me, but I brushed past her, my eyes locked on Melissa and Derek. I approached their table, my heart pounding in my ears. Melissa looked up, her eyes widening in shock as she saw me. "James," she stammered, her face draining of color. "Derek, I presume." I said, my voice cold. Derek looked from Melissa to me, confusion and fear flickering across his face. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, trying to sound tough but failing. "I'm her husband," I replied, savoring the way the words made him pale. "And I think we need to have a little chat." Melissa stood up, reaching for my arm. "James, please, not here," she pleaded, her voice shaking. I shrugged her off, my eyes never leaving Derek's. "Oh, I think here is perfect," I said, a dark smile playing on my lips. "Don't you agree, Derek?" He swallowed hard, glancing around the restaurant. "Look, man, I didn't know she was married. Let's just talk about this calmly." "Calmly?" I laughed, a bitter sound. "You think we can just talk this out? After what you've been doing behind my back?" Melissa was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "James, please," she begged, but I ignored her. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, leaning closer to Derek. "You're going to leave, and you're never going to see her again. If I find out you even text her, I will destroy you. Understand?" Derek nodded, his face pale. He stood up, his eyes never leaving mine as he backed away. "I'm sorry," he muttered before turning and practically running out of the restaurant. Melissa sank back into her seat, her shoulders shaking with sobs. I stood there, breathing heavily, the adrenaline still coursing through me. The restaurant was silent, all eyes on us. I reached down, grabbing Melissa's arm and pulling her to her feet. "We're going home," I said, my voice brooking no argument. She nodded, too distraught to protest, and I led her out to the car. The drive home was silent, tension thick in the air. When we arrived, Melissa collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I stood over her, my anger slowly giving way to a cold, calculating resolve. "Sorry isn't enough," I said quietly. "You broke my trust, Melissa. You betrayed me." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "What can I do to make it right?" I didn't answer immediately, my mind working through the possibilities. Revenge had been sweet, but it wasn't enough. I needed to make sure she understood the gravity of what she'd done. "You'll see," I said finally, turning away. "You'll see." As I walked up the stairs to our bedroom, I knew this was just the beginning. The betrayal had cut deep, but my response would cut deeper. The game had only just begun. I woke up early the next morning, the events of the previous night still fresh in my mind. Melissa was still asleep, her face puffy from crying. I watched her for a moment, a mix of emotions churning inside me. I felt betrayed, angry, but also a strange sense of determination. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I headed downstairs and made a pot of coffee, the familiar routine calming my nerves. As I poured myself a cup, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from my best friend, Mike. We've known each other since college, and he's always had my back. I shot him a quick text, asking if we could meet later. I needed to talk to someone about this, and Mike was the only one I trusted. Melissa came down a little while later, her eyes avoiding mine. "Morning," she said softly, her voice hoarse. "Morning," I replied, not looking up from my coffee. She hesitated in the doorway, her hands twisting nervously. "I'm going to take the day off," she said finally. "I need some time to think." I nodded, still not looking at her. "Do whatever you need to do," I said coldly. She flinched at my tone, but didn't argue. She turned and headed back upstairs, and I heard the bedroom door close softly behind her. I left the house a little while later, needing to clear my head. I drove aimlessly for a while before heading to the park where Mike and I often met. He was already there, sitting on a bench near the lake, a concerned look on his face. "Hey man," he said as I approached. "What's going on? You sounded pretty upset." I sat down heavily next to him, running a hand through my hair. "It's Melissa," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "She's been seeing someone else. I caught her last night." Mike's eyes widened in shock. Are you serious? What the hell happened? I told him everything. From the strange scent on her clothes to the messages I found and the confrontation at the restaurant. By the time I finished, Mike looked as angry as I felt. That's messed up, he said, shaking his head. I can't believe she would do that to you. What are you going to do? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to just walk away, but another part of me wants to make her and that guy pay for what they've done. Mike nodded slowly. I get it, man, but you need to be careful. You don't want to do something you'll regret. I know, I said, frustration evident in my voice. But I can't just let this go. I need to do something. Mike was silent for a moment. Then he looked at me with a determined expression. All right, if you're serious about this, then I'll help you. We'll figure out a way to make them pay without getting ourselves into trouble. I felt a surge of gratitude for my friend. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. He clapped me on the shoulder. That's what friends are for. Now, let's figure out our next move. We spent the next couple of hours brainstorming ideas. Mike suggested we gather more evidence before making any moves. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with, he said. We need to find out who this direct guy is and what his relationship with Melissa really is. I agreed, and we decided to start by following Melissa. If she's been meeting Derek regularly, we should be able to catch them together again. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction at the thought. This time, I'd be prepared. We parted ways with a plan in place, and I headed home feeling more in control. When I walked in, Melissa was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. She looked up as I entered, her eyes wary. Where did you go? She asked quietly. Out, I said shortly. I needed to clear my head. She nodded, looking down at her hands. I'm sorry, James, she said, her voice trembling. I never meant for this to happen. I stared at her for a moment, a part of me wanting to believe her. But the hurt and anger were too strong. It's a bit late for apologies, don't you think? You made your choice. She flinched, tears welling in her eyes. I know, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. I didn't respond, turning away from her. I need some time to think, I said finally. I'm going out again. Don't wait up. I left the house without another word, my mind racing. I headed to a bar across town, a place where I could think without distraction. As I sat at the bar nursing a drink, I thought about Melissa and Derek, about the betrayal and the lies. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I pulled out my phone and called Mike. I need a favor, I said when he answered. I need you to find out everything you can about Derek. I want to know who he is, where he lives, everything. Mike didn't hesitate. Consider it done, he said. I'll get on it right away. I hung up and took a deep breath, feeling a sense of purpose. This wasn't over. I was going to find out everything I could about Derek, and then I'd decide what to do next. As I sat there, a plan started to form in my mind, a plan that would make Melissa and Derek regret ever betraying me. When I finally headed home, it was late. The house was dark and silent, and Melissa was already asleep. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching her for a moment. Despite everything, I still felt a pang of sadness at the thought of what we'd lost. But it was quickly replaced by a steely resolve. I wasn't going to let this break me. I was going to take control and make them pay. The next morning, I was up early again, my mind buzzing with plans. Mike texted me with an update on Derek. He'd found his address and some basic information about him. I felt a surge of satisfaction. This was exactly what I needed. I called Mike, and we made plans to meet later. I wanted to go over the information he'd found and figure out our next steps. As I hung up, I felt a strange sense of anticipation. This was just the beginning. Melissa and Derek had no idea what was coming. As I headed downstairs, Melissa was in the kitchen, making breakfast. She looked up as I entered, her expression tentative. "Good morning," she said softly. "Morning," I replied, my tone neutral. I could see the relief in her eyes, but it didn't soften my resolve. I was playing a long game, and I couldn't afford to let my guard down. We ate breakfast in silence, the tension between us palpable. When I finished, I stood up and grabbed my keys. "I have to go," I said. "I'll be back later." "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Out," I said shortly. "Don't wait up." As I walked out the door, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. This was just the beginning. Melissa and Derek had no idea what was coming, and by the time I was done, they'd regret ever crossing me. I spent the rest of the day with Mike, poring over the information he'd gathered on Derek. We sat in his cramped apartment, the walls covered with posters of rock bands and sports teams, the faint smell of old pizza lingering in the air. "Okay, here's what we know," Mike said, spreading the papers out on the coffee table. "Derek Williams, 34 years old, works at a marketing firm downtown, divorced, no kids, lives alone in a condo a few miles from here." I studied the papers, my mind racing. "Does he have any family in the area? Friends?" Mike shook his head. "Not that I could find. He's pretty private. But I did find this." He handed me a printout of Derek's social media profile. "He's not very active, but he posts occasionally. Mostly about work and the occasional outing." I looked at the profile, noting the carefully curated images of Derek at work events, smiling with colleagues, and the occasional scenic photo. "We need to find out more about his routine," I said. "Where he goes, who he sees. If we're going to catch him off guard, we need to know his schedule." Mike nodded. "I can do some more digging. Maybe follow him for a few days. See what he's up to." "Good," I said, feeling a sense of satisfaction. "Let's start tonight. I'll meet you here after work." We parted ways, and I headed home, my mind buzzing with plans. When I walked in, Melissa was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She looked up as I entered, her eyes wary. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice tentative. "Busy," I replied curtly, not meeting her gaze. "I've got some work to do tonight, so I'll be out for a while." She nodded, her shoulders sagging slightly. "Okay." I headed upstairs to change, my mind already focused on the evening ahead. I could feel the tension between us, but I pushed it aside. There would be time to deal with that later. Right now, I had a mission. As I headed back downstairs, I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. "Don't wait up," I said over my shoulder. Melissa didn't respond, and I could feel her eyes on me as I left. The drive to Mike's place was filled with a mix of anticipation and anger. I was determined to see this through, no matter what. When I arrived, Mike was already waiting for me, a pair of binoculars slung around his neck. "Ready?" he asked, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Let's do this," I replied. We drove to Derek's condo, parking a few blocks away to avoid suspicion. The neighborhood was quiet, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. We settled in, watching the building from a distance. "Here," Mike said, handing me a pair of binoculars. "Keep an eye on the entrance. If he leaves, we follow." Hours passed, and the tension mounted. We watched as people came and went, but there was no sign of Derek. Just as I was starting to lose hope, I saw him. He stepped out of the building, looking around before heading down the street. "There he is," I whispered, nudging Mike. "Let's go." We followed him at a safe distance, careful not to draw attention. He walked briskly, heading towards a bar a few blocks away. We watched as he entered, the neon sign casting a garish glow on his face. "Now what?" Mike asked, his voice low. "We wait," I said, my mind racing. "Let's see who he's meeting." We found a spot near the entrance, keeping a close eye on the bar. After a few minutes, a woman walked in. She was tall with dark hair and a confident stride. I recognized her immediately, one of Melissa's colleagues from work. "Who's that?" Mike asked, following my gaze. "One of Melissa's coworkers," I replied, my jaw tightening. "Looks like he's got a type." We watched as Derek and the woman found a table, their heads close together as they talked. The sight of them laughing and flirting made my blood boil. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my anger in check. "What now?" Mike asked, sensing my agitation. "We need to get closer," I said, my voice low. "I want to hear what they're saying." We moved to a table near the bar, close enough to overhear their conversation. Derek was leaning in, his hand brushing the woman's arm as he talked. "So when can I see you again?" he asked, his voice smooth. She laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Soon, I hope. I've missed you." My grip on the glass tightened, the anger bubbling up inside me. This wasn't just a casual fling. Derek was a serial cheater, and he'd been playing Melissa and this woman against each other. I looked at Mike, my eyes hard. "We need to do something," I said. "I can't just sit here and watch this." Mike nodded, his expression serious. "I've got an idea," he said, "but you're not going to like it." "What is it?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "We confront him," Mike said. "Right here, right now. Let him know we're onto him. Maybe it'll scare him off." I hesitated, the idea tempting but risky. But as I watched Derek and the woman laughing together, my resolve hardened. "Let's do it," I said, standing up. We made our way to their table, the tension in the air palpable. Derek looked up as we approached, his eyes widening in surprise. "Can we help you?" he asked, his voice steady but his eyes betraying his unease. "You can start by explaining what the hell you're doing," I said, my voice cold. The woman looked confused, glancing between Derek and me. "Do you know these guys?" she asked, her tone wary. Derek tried to play it cool, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice a little too smooth. "Cut the crap," Mike said, stepping forward. "We know about you and Melissa. And now this. How many women are you stringing along?" The woman's face paled, and she stood up abruptly. "What is this, Derek?" she stammered, his facade crumbling. "It's not what it looks like, Lisa. I can explain." But Lisa wasn't listening. She grabbed her bag and stormed out of the bar, leaving Derek to face us alone. "Look," he said, his voice desperate. "I don't want any trouble. Can we just talk about this?" "We're done talking," I said, my voice ice cold. "Stay away from Melissa, and if I ever see you near her again, you'll regret it." Derek nodded, his face ashen. Okay, I'll stay away. Just please, leave me alone." Mike and I turned and walked out of the bar, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. As we stepped into the cool night air, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. This was just the beginning. Derek might be out of the picture for now, but I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. When I got home, Melissa was waiting for me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Out," I said shortly. "I had some things to take care of." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "James, please, I'm sorry. I'll do anything to make this right." I stared at her for a moment, the anger and hurt still fresh. "We'll see," I said finally, turning away. "We'll see." As I headed upstairs to bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Melissa and Derek might be out of my life, but the betrayal still lingered. And I was determined to see this through to the end, whatever it took. The next few days passed in a tense blur. Melissa and I existed in a strained silence, each of us pretending to live our lives while a storm brewed beneath the surface. Mike and I continued to keep an eye on Derek, making sure he kept his distance. One evening, just as the sun was setting, Mike called me. "You need to get over here," he said, his voice urgent. "I found something. Something big." I grabbed my keys and headed over to Mike's place, my mind racing. When I arrived, he was pacing the living room, a look of grim determination on his face. "What is it?" I asked, the tension in my voice matching his. Mike handed me a folder, his expression serious. It's about Derek. There's more to him than we thought. I opened the folder and started reading. My eyes widened as I took in the details. Derek wasn't just some random guy Melissa met. He had a history, a criminal record for fraud and embezzlement. And it got worse. Are you sure about this? I asked, looking up at Mike. He nodded. I triple-checked. Derek Williams isn't his real name. He's been using different aliases for years, conning women and stealing their money. He's dangerous, James. A cold shiver ran down my spine. This changed everything. It was no longer just about betrayal. It was about danger. Melissa was in over her head, and she didn't even know it. We need to tell Melissa, I said, my voice steely. She needs to know who she's dealing with. Mike nodded. I agree. But we need to be careful. If Derek finds out we're onto him, there's no telling what he might do. We headed back to my house, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on us. When we arrived, Melissa was in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. She looked up as we entered, her eyes filled with confusion and fear. What's going on? She asked, her voice trembling. We need to talk, I said, my tone serious. It's about Derek. Her face paled, and she looked between Mike and me, her eyes wide with fear. What about him? Mike stepped forward, his expression grim. Derek isn't who you think he is. He's a con artist, Melissa. He's been using you. She shook her head, disbelief etched on her face. No, that's not possible. Derek wouldn't do that. I handed her the folder, watching as she flipped through the pages. Her hands trembled, and tears welled up in her eyes. I don't understand, she whispered. How could I have been so blind? It's not your fault, I said gently. He's been doing this for years. He's good at it. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with despair. What do we do now? We go to the police, Mike said firmly. They need to know about Derek. And you need to stay away from him, Melissa. He's dangerous. She nodded, wiping away her tears. Okay, I'll do it. I'll go to the police. As we sat down to plan our next steps, the doorbell rang. We exchanged wary glances, and I walked over to the door, peering through the peephole. My heart skipped a beat when I saw Derek standing on the porch, a smug smile on his face. James, open up, he called out, his voice dripping with false friendliness. We need to talk. I turned to Mike and Melissa, my heart pounding in my chest. It's him, I whispered. He's here. Mike's eyes widened, and he gestured for me to step back. Let me handle this, he said, his voice low. He opened the door, stepping outside and closing it behind him. I heard muffled voices, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. After a few moments, the voices escalated, and I heard a loud crash. I rushed to the door, flinging it open just in time to see Derek shove Mike against the wall, his face contorted with rage. Stay out of this, he snarled. This is between me and Melissa. I stepped forward, my own anger boiling over. It's over, Derek. We know who you are. We're going to the police. Derek's eyes flicked to me, a dangerous glint in them. You think you can stop me? He sneered. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Before I could react, he lunged at me, his fist connecting with my jaw. I stumbled back, pain radiating through my face. Mike recovered quickly, tackling Derek to the ground. They struggled, and I jumped in, helping Mike pin him down. Call the police, I shouted to Melissa, who was watching in horror from the doorway. She fumbled for her phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. Please hurry, she cried into the phone. We need help. There's a man attacking my husband. We managed to hold Derek down until the police arrived, their sirens blaring in the distance. They burst through the door, pulling Derek off of us and handcuffing him. As they led him away, he glared at me, a sinister smile on his face. This isn't over, he hissed. I'll be back. The police took our statements, and we finally began to relax as Derek was driven away in the back of a squad car. Melissa collapsed into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm so sorry, James," she whispered. "I never meant for any of this to happen." I held her close, my own emotions in turmoil. "We'll get through this," I said, my voice shaking. "Together." In the days that followed, we worked with the police to ensure Derek was charged for his crimes. The evidence Mike gathered was crucial, and it became clear that Derek would be behind bars for a long time. Melissa and I began to rebuild our relationship, the experience bringing us closer together in ways I never thought possible. The betrayal still hurt, but I was determined to move past it. We started going to couples therapy, working through our issues and learning to trust each other again. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Melissa turned to me, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for standing by me," she said softly. "I don't deserve it, but I'm so grateful." I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We've both made mistakes," I said, "but what matters is that we're here together. We can get through anything." As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions, but I was finally starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Just as I was about to suggest we go inside, my phone buzzed with a text. I pulled it out, frowning as I read the message. It was from an unknown number, and my blood ran cold as I recognized the words. "This isn't over. I'll be back. Derek." I showed the message to Melissa, her face draining of color. "What do we do?" she whispered, fear evident in her voice. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "We stay strong," I said firmly. "We don't let him control our lives, and we make sure he never gets the chance to hurt us again." As we headed inside, I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Melissa by my side, I was ready to face whatever came our way. Together, we were stronger than any threat Derek could throw at us, and we'd make sure he never got the chance to tear us apart again. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.